All right, yo, we're live. We're live. Listen, I got basically I call him the OG of this comic thing, at least on this side of the fence, because before him there was nobody that readily we could point to and say he's doing that. And I reached out to him. He's gracious enough to be here, Mr. Sean James, sir. Can you, let's get right into it. You were doing this before it became fashionable. Um, does it make you feel good to see more of us in it and creating art and the industry take off the way it's been taken off? Or how does that, as of right now, how the scope of it? How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm happy to see more people into comics, science fiction, and fantasy because it's very good for people to be able to get into comics and science fiction and fantasy because it allows people to open up their imaginations, allows them to see a larger world, and it allows us to get a better perspective on the world by having all of this diversity of thought and ideas as related to the genre and the art form.
Do you feel you're getting enough credit for the movement? Because I think, and we're kind of jumping ahead, but I think Eric July, I'm like, nah, there were guys long before him and others. And for me, I feel like you are one of the progenitors to kind of make it okay and make it safe for people to come out and say, hey, I'm into this stuff as well. Am I shooting it too far or no?
No, not really. I was never looking for credit like that. I was never really looking for fame like that. This was just a passion for me. I mean, I grew up ever since I was 4 years old. My brother had this big comic collection, and I would read his comics. I mean, I practically knew who all of the Avengers were when I was 4 years old, and I always wanted to be a part of this. I mean, I was at 9 years old. I was writing stories because I couldn't draw, so I started using words to create pictures. I always wanted to be a part of this whole thing with comics. I mean, this was a part of my life growing up as a kid. I mean, I collected comics and I even aspired to be a comic book writer. But when I couldn't get into the industry, I went over to the world of trade publishing and I started trying to submit there and I couldn't make much traction. So eventually in 2009, I started my own publishing company, SJS Direct, where I could go out here and write my own stories and get them out to the marketplace. So this has been a passion for me. It's always been a passion for me. It's something that I've loved doing for the last, I'd say, 30, 35 years. And I have always been happy to do it. And I'm always happy to share it, all the kind of stories I want to tell with people. This is just something that means a lot to me. And it's never been about fame or prestige. It's always been about two things. One, opening up and expanding this Black book market so Black children could be able to imagine like other people in the rest of the world are allowed to imagine and see a world with themselves in it. And two, create positive stories that Black children could see positive images of themselves and imagine themselves as part of a larger world of people. Those are the things that I wanted to contribute to the whole genre of fiction. And that's what I always wanted to do as a creator.
Okay, walk us through the time. I think we're roughly around the same age. You're growing up in this. Did you have any horror stories? What did you get, the typical name calling and the ostracization of us to others, that you look weird, you sound weird, you're into this kind of stuff. Did you have any of those experiences? Did that, and if you
I
did
just
that?
did a video on that
Okay.
today, just about 5 minutes ago. I mean, I have been the guy who has been bullied. I mean, I was even bullied by nerds to a point, and I've always been the outsider. So I have had to deal with that all my life. I had to deal with people making fun of my voice, making fun of the way I speak. Some people saying that you talk like a white guy, and I this was just not something that I've dealt with all the time. I mean, I've dealt with this for years, and I still deal with it. I mean, I had people coming on my channel talking about I talk like a robot. They're not used to hearing an intelligent Black man speaking articulately or have an interest in hobbies like comics or science fiction. I mean, they're not used to that kind of thing because they have this stereotypical idea about being Black. I mean, I talk about this in my novel Spellbound in depth, and it's something that I have lived with for years, but it doesn't stop me from being myself. I mean, everywhere I go, I just stay true to who I am because I understand that people are just going to either they're going to accept you as you are or they're not going to accept you at all. So the only thing you can do is just be yourself and not be afraid to be yourself.
Awesome. So let's skip a little ahead. So you have your idea of what you want to do as far as your career path. So you do the usual beating down the doors and trying to get into the industry. So what problems did you experience in, I guess, preventing you from getting into the industry per se?
Well, what kept me from getting into the industry was the fact that in the 90s, the industry was extremely insular. I mean, the comic book business was booming at the time, and you just could not get into a door anywhere. I mean, these companies basically locked out all of the talent, and they just didn't want to even talk to anyone outside of the business. And the only way in was through Comic Cons. And at that time, I didn't really have the money to go to the Comic Cons and get into the Comic Cons. So it was the 90s. I just came out of college. I was broke. I couldn't find any job. And it was just hard to get in. And that's one of the things that kept me out. And as time went on, I just decided, okay, since I can't get into comics because you just can't find anybody to get in touch with. I mean, when Milestone was around, I sent them a resume and cover letter, never heard a thing from them. I would try to think about going to find ways to get into Marvel and DC, never heard a thing from them. And I never heard anything from them. So I just moved on, and I was doing the first John Hayes story, The Changing Soul, at the time. I never published that book, but I tried to submit it to trade publishers, and I didn't understand that at the time that the trade industry was run by white women, and they had no real interest in publishing books by a black man. They had no interest in publishing books by a black man because they were pushing a misandristic black woman narrative, black man narrative, where they were positioning the single, successful, well-educated black woman, and there was under that narrative there was no good black man. And I was actually a guy who was out here presenting a positive image of black manhood, and that was counter to their narrative of selling books. So I just couldn't get in there. So I started, as I was working in America, I took the last $200 of my $600 and I published the first ISIS in 2002. And then after I had gotten a job at the City College of New York, I started building the SJS Direct Imprint because I didn't want to keep paying these print-on-demand publishers. So I started to start my own company. And after, sadly, I lost my job, I started the SJS Direct Imprint in 2009. And from there, I started to lay my foundation for building my own company because I couldn't get into comics or book publishers. I mean, I did get a request about 2016 from Dynamite. They asked me to send in a submission. Never heard anything from them. And since then, I've just been focusing on building my own platforms with the SJS Direct Imprint and getting my material out there because I tried to come into mainstream comics. I know that people out there know who I am. I mean, my blog, when it was out, people as far back as 2012, I heard from one of my Facebook friends, people at these companies knew who I was, but they just never contacted me. So I just figured I'll just go out here and build it myself. I've been building it myself for years. And the toughest part is just trying to find the money to get in it together to be able to do different projects because I've always wanted to do the ISIS graphic novel, just like I did the recent John Haynes comic for the Kickstarter. I mean, I want to get more projects out there, but the whole thing is just trying to break into this industry is next to impossible because a lot of people, they know who you are, but they just don't want to come out and contact you.
So what was the final straw for you after beating down the doors? No responses. Okay, was creating your own uh, content always the end goal for you, or was that was just like, you know what, this is it, no more rejections. I'm gonna just go out and strike out on my own.
Well, it was never really personal for me with these publishing companies. I always knew that rejection was just a part of the process. So the thing that made me want to go out on my own was always ownership. The one thing I understood about this business is ownership is important because ownership is a way towards wealth. And if you are owning your intellectual property and you own all the rights to your intellectual property, what happens is when you own it, you can go out here and license it. That's something I learned way back in the 90s when I started submitting to publishers. I learned that you always want to make sure that you own all your rights because if I own the rights to John Haynes, if I own the rights to ISIS, that means that the companies don't own that character. That means I can go out here and if I want to make action figures, I can go contact a company like Loose Collector Collectibles and ask them to make the ISIS action figures at a certain scale. I can go to another company, possibly in Japan, and ask them to do another scale. I can go out here and and get a production company to sign off on the film and television rights. I mean, I can go out here and do a comic book because if you own all the rights, you can make multiple versions of adaptations, and that is revenue streams. And those revenue streams mean that you can make a lot of money on a character. So I always knew that this was, as a business, was all about ownership, and ownership is the most important thing as related to this business because a lot of creators, they don't understand the ownership. They just want to have a Marvel or a DC or a Dynamite label on their books, but they don't understand if you don't get it right, you're not going to own anything at the end of the day, and everybody's going to get rich at your expense, and you're not going to be able to have something that will be able to take care of you at the end of the day.
How long did it take you to craft your universe? And I'm referring to the ISIS universe, because it's pretty expansive. And a lot of critiques I hear, or the first thing is, oh, they always say the story. The story has to be the most important thing, the story and the character. So, at what point did you start developing the ISIS universe characters or storyline? How long did that take you to kind of flesh it out altogether before you started releasing for publication?
Well, that universe was something that was done. It took about, I'd say, about 10, 15 years for me to put together. I mean, I started creating the ISIS character back in 1998, 1999. That's when I created the ISIS character. And that universe took a while to build. I mean, it took time over different books. I mean, the first ISIS came out in 2002, and the world I continued to build it. I mean, it started out with that book in 2002, but as time went on, I started to do a little book that introduced Lucifer, The Politics of Hell. That book is free on Smashwords. And after I did that book in 2005, I decided to bring Isis and John Haynes' world together with the Temptation of John Haynes. And that basically is the foundation of the SJS Direct Universe. So that took about, well, I think about from 1998 to 2005, that took about 8 years to start laying that foundation. And then in 2013, I brought ISIS into I'd already brought ISIS into the modern world with the Temptation of John Haynes. And I just needed the right story to really bring everything together. And the Thetas took us, and that created a bridge that allowed us to see where ISIS was in the modern world, building the Theta sorority. And that led us into Amari's Revenge, which was the 2012 book of the 10th anniversary of ISIS. So that book basically put ISIS and John Haynes in the same world because that's where ISIS meets Ascheme. So it took me, I'd say, from 98 to 2012, it took me a good bit of time to put it together, but I always made sure that every block that I built connected to the further blocks, and it just built the story up. Just it takes time to do it, but you just have to understand how to do it. I mean, what really helped me to be able to understand how to build worlds was I read Stan Lee's Origins of Marvel Comics, Son of Origins of Marvel Comics, and I read a lot about the DC continuity. So I had a good background in continuity ever since I was about 4 years old. I remember reading the Flash at 15 years old. I was able to figure out that Wally West was connected to Barry Allen, who had died in the crisis, without even reading a comic book that it had happened in. That was just how astute I was. And I remember reading like Green Flame was fire from the 1980s. So I had a good background in learning about how to work continuity ever since I was a kid. And I just applied that towards building the SJS Direct Universe. And as I took time, I took the 2002 stories, tied them into the Temptation of John Haynes, and then further used that with the bridging book, The Thetas, to bring everything together to create the full SJS Direct Universe with the ISIS series, the Ascheme series, and the John Haynes series. And I was able to build a world that was easy for everyone to follow. I mean, what I wanted to do was follow in the footsteps of legendary creators like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby as they crafted the Marvel Universe and building a world that was easy and accessible to follow. And I took tips from Jim Shooter's blog, where Jim Shooter talked about how you want every story to be an entry point, and that's all part of the craft and technique that I've learned over the years. I mean, Jim Shooter's blog really helped me out a lot as related to developing those building blocks and understanding that you have to make every story one that is the reader's first story and their first experience, and you have to really make that story something that really grabs their attention and gets them into that book and really gets them excited. And from the business model I learned from reading Jim Shooter's blog, I developed my own techniques with paperbacks, and people get so excited about the SJS Direct Universe books. What they do is they go, and after they pick up a recent book, I'll have people going for the back issues, and then coming back for the forward issue, similar to the way I used to be at the comic shop. When I would go to the comic shop, people would pick up an issue and then go back to the back issue to find out what would happen. I mean, this is all stuff that I learned just out here doing my research and everything I learned about the business. So it took years for me to learn how to do it, but I built that universe, I mean, in a little bit of time. And I laid that foundation and those structures from all the stuff that I learned just reading comics for many years.
So, what was the inspiration for ISIS? Because when I first picked it up, or when we found it again, I got very heavy Kemet vibes, and it took me back to when I was heavy into Kemet in Egypt and all that. It just brought back all these waves of like, yo, yeah, I remember. And what was the inspiration for ISIS? And what did you want the readers to take away from that particular universe per se?
Well, the inspiration for ISIS started one morning, not really one morning, one Sunday night when my family, we were sitting at the dinner table and my sisters told me there really aren't that many Black female superheroines. And after I did my own research, I said, yeah, there aren't that many Black superheroines. And I really wanted to go out here and make a Black superheroine because one of the things that really upset me about the Milestone universe was they never had a Black heroine as a lead character. I mean, with Milestone, we got Hardware, Icon, Blood Syndicate, and Static, but we didn't get that Black female heroine who could be a lead. And the one heroine they had, Rocket, you had them make her a single mom in the second issue. And it really didn't give us that positive example of Black womanhood. And I really wanted to present a positive example of Black womanhood that little Black girls could relate to. And after sitting at the dinner table with my family, I had this dream about this woman, Isis, and I decided I wanted to make the character a goddess, but I didn't want to make the character a take on the Egyptian goddess character. I wanted to show how it related to Nubian mythology to make her distinct. And as I did my research, I decided that I would make the character the daughter of Osiris from one of his Nubian sister wives. And this character would be who was somebody who was born from a human and was struggling with all of these issues as related to the things a lot of Black girls dealt with these feelings of inadequacy and insecurity and struggling with just being human because you're living in a world where you're dealing with all of these different things. And I wanted to create a heroine that every little girl could relate to. So that's one of the things that I wanted to do with that character, give little Black girls their own Black heroine. And I wanted to tie it to the Nubian side of the mythology because a lot of people focus on the Egyptian. And when they focus on the Egyptian, they do like the 1970s series, try to project a whiteness onto the character. But when the character is Nubian, you can't really project anything white onto the character because the character is Black. And if you're coming out of Nubia, you're coming straight out of Africa. And Nubia was the only kingdom intact after the Romans took over the Egyptians. And the Nubians basically beat the Romans. So that laid the foundation for the Isis character being Nubian. And I really wanted to focus on the character and a destiny that she had in the early stories, but then she starts to form her own destiny. And as she forms her own destiny, I wanted to show how she was really deeply connected to Black people because she, like Black people, are people without a nation because Black people came out of slavery. And as she comes into it, she has to deal with things like white supremacy. She has to deal with racism. And that's the thing that basically led to her having a great tragedy in her life. But that tragedy is something that makes her go back for later on in stories like Imitation of Life to help Black people. This is where she forms the Theta sorority to help Black girls. And that's tied to the old African proverb of a race can rise no higher than the moral position of its women. And as the woman goes, so goes the race. And I really wanted to show how there were Black people during the time of Jim Crow and how they were heroes and how our definition of hero was different because we couldn't operate the same way in the time of Jim Crow, but we had people out here who were heroes, like our educated Black professionals, educated Black business owners. And from there, that's where I decided that that would be her time of being a hero in the golden age. And then later on in the modern age, she could do this kind of superhero stuff because the world would be a lot more open for Black people. And that's where I came up with the whole concept of the goddess next door. That's where I was going to do where Isis was like a girl next door, going where she was needed, helping people where they needed help. And that started with the whole series that started in 2012 with the Amari's Revenge, the Ultimate Fight, and My Sister, My Frenemy. All those stories lay the foundation for the Goddess Next Door and the hero that she becomes. But the whole idea for Isis was always about showing little black girls how they can be heroes, and how Isis was a hero all throughout history.
So when you're fleshing out your story, at what point do you know it's a good story? That's number one. Secondly, you spoke to about the continuity, and what aspects of continuity did you learn and that you applied to make sure all the stories tie in? There's no plot holes or red herrings or anything like that. So I'm curious to know, when do you stop yourself and say, okay, I got a good story here. I'm good here. I can stop. Or do you, or how much time you give yourself, and then you hit me before you decide to say, okay, I got it's good. I need to not do anymore or overdo it per se.
Well, that's an instinctive thing. I mean, every writer has what we call a story sense. And with that story sense, we know where to end things and move on. I mean, usually with ISIS stories, what I do is I just go and I look for story points, or I'll establish story points to pick up on, and I'll use that to build my next story. I mean, that's what I did with the whole Cyber Goddess saga. What I did was I created a story called Isis the Beauty Myth, and that lays the foundation for the feud between Isis and Rahima Sanders. And that story basically was where Isis is dealing with her whole issues as related to feeling inadequate about her beauty. And we have Rahima, in contrast, who covets Isis's immortality and the fact that she's a goddess, wants that for herself. And that lays the foundation for that feud. And that story, basically, I built that over time in and others in all throughout a series of books. I mean, there were other books that have hints of it. And then I go back to the Cyber Goddess story, Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, and that's the story where I take the story point of Rahima wanting revenge on Isis and looking to get even with her by becoming this god through technology. And I take that story point and a story point that I've been building in the early Isis series books, of Amari's Revenge and the My Sister, My Frenemy, where Isis is supposed to meet John Haynes, and those two story points are two that I put together to create the overall story arc for the Cyber Goddess saga, and that really ties into Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, because each of those stories, they have story points that I picked, and all when you're writing storylines, what you want to do is make sure that you have plot points that you can pick up on, because as I learned in Sid Field's screenplay, stories are about endings and beginnings. And what you want to do is with each story, you want to be able to set it up to pay off the first story for the main story point, but you want to leave something that you can pick up on later on. That's something I learned from reading comics for years. I learned that you always want to make sure that you leave a story point so you can pick up with these characters again. And the next thing I also want people to understand is that you always want to leave your characters in good condition so that you can pick up and use those characters once again. So whenever I write a story, I always make sure that when I pick my story points, I always leave something so that I can come back and pick up on it once more. And I always make sure that the characters are in good condition so I can continue the story and be able to finish it. Again, this is all something that takes years of time for you to develop, and developing your story sense is all a major part of it. Your story sense is going to be the thing that lets you know, okay, these are the story points you need to pick up on. This is this story point here that you picked up in this story you need to use for the next story. This story point is one that you want to use to develop this character's transformation arc, in developing their character a bit more so we can get to know them a bit more. This action sequence showcases where their power set is at a certain point. I mean, all of these things are things that you use to build your stories up, because with the Cyber Goddess saga, I started out with the beauty myth, with Isis dealing with her feelings of inadequacy, and that leading to her having the feud with Rahima. And then with Cyber Goddess, we get Rahima getting powered up and looking to show out to Isis in an effort to humiliate her, and Isis suffering one of the greatest humiliations in that John Haynes had to save her. And then that built into Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, where Isis starts to rebuild her confidence, and that confidence gets built up over a series of stories like Night of the Vampires and Bride of Dracula. The entire vampire saga ties into Isis's growth and development, and that builds into the main event wrestling storyline, which is a part of the Nemesis story. So over the course of the run, we see the ISIS character growing and developing, and it takes time to really have that set up. And again, I usually do that with a character transformation story arc. I used to do it in my head for ISIS stories, but now I'm starting to do more outlines. Ever since I started working with Spinsterella, I've been doing a lot more character transformation arcs and outlines so I can get everything laid out perfectly. But it takes time to do it, but you just have to take that time. And the more you become honed in your craft, you'll be better at developing characters and transforming them over a course of stories.
Okay, that's it's pretty heady what you just all broke down. And so let me ask you this: I consider you once again an OG, a progenitor of the industry in your regards. So you were here before the whole Comics Gate, before things kind of went left in the business, in the industry. What was your take on it when you first seen the whole Comics Gate go down? What was your immediate thoughts on that?
Well, with Comicsgate, I was at one point I did support them for a minute because I thought that they were about helping people learn more about the craft of comics. Because I looked at a lot of those what they called SJW comics, and
Yeah.
I could see the lack of craft, the lack of experience in them. They were looking to push their political agendas without understanding the nuances of storytelling. And I thought a lot of those Comicsgate guys were all about trying to help get new readers into the medium, get new readers into comics. And that's something I thought that they wanted to do because right at the time I had written an ISIS graphic novel. I wanted to try to get that funded. And these people basically, they were so caught up in their ideology, they didn't even want to try to help me at all. And while I was out there, I just thought that that was what they were about. But then they weren't about that. It was all about just them having their agenda. And really, it was just all about these white guys basically looking to have control over the comic book industry. That's where Comicsgate really went left for me because it wasn't really about getting great comics in the hands of readers. I mean, as a guy who loves comics and has been with comics since I was 4 years old, my goal is to get good comics in the hands of readers. I mean, there are so many really great comics out there. I mean, there are guys out here like Isaac Bell, and I forget what the other guy's name is. He has a great comic in Metal Shade. There are other guys like Raymond Leonard with Agent Solo, just fantastic comic. And there's just really good comics out there. But these guys weren't talking about any of those indie comics. They were just all about getting theirs funded. Now, I wanted to get my comic funded, but I also want to get comics in the hands of readers. And that's where I have an issue with Comicsgate because it just seems like they're looking to make the same type of fiefdom that imploded the comic book industry in the 90s. They're not about looking to try to get good comics in people's hands. I mean, I don't see these guys making videos like I do. I've made comic review videos whenever I can do it. I always go out here and try to put in pledges for Kickstarters. Like I recently put in a pledge for Nick Capone's Purity Kickstarter, and there was a great comic that I had read called The Exorcist Club. I mean, they don't talk about any of those comics. You go to their channels, and it's just all they talk about is their book. Their book is so great. I mean, they have this delusion that they're going to be the saviors of the comic book industry. But as a guy who's been in this business for over 20 years as a writer and over 10 years as a publisher, I can tell you there's never going to be one book that's going to be the savior of the comic book industry. I mean, while people have read all these things about Giant Size X-Men #1 revolutionizing things, no, that didn't happen automatically overnight. No, it took at least a good year and a half for the X-Men to build momentum to get that big. And the sales didn't really start picking up. I know this from experience because when I did the whole John Haynes series, The Temptation of John Haynes, yes, it got a lot of critical acclaim in the beginning, but it didn't really get blockbuster sales. It wasn't until I did John Haynes, A Conversation with Death in 2018 that character started to pick up. I mean, that character, I had created that character back in 1990. I didn't do The Temptation of John Haynes until 2005, and I didn't publish it until 2011. So look at that timeline. You'll see it takes years for a character to pick up. Same thing with even all those books in the Marvel Age of Comics, like Fantastic Four #1 and Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy. This didn't happen overnight. But the Comicsgate guys, they want to believe that they can be the saviors of the comic book industry overnight. And no, it don't happen like that. Again, Well, a lot of people didn't even know my SJS Direct books existed for a long time. Again, the ISIS series has been out since 2012. The original ISIS has been out since 2002. I mean, Temptation of John Haynes was out in 2011. The Esteem books didn't start until about 2013. But you have guys out there that with this Comicsgate, they just have this ridiculous whole notion they're going to be these guys who put on the cape and save the industry. And the industry won't be good unless they are the ones in charge. And that's where I can see a little bit of the white supremacy with these kind of guys, in that they want to make it all about them white men being in charge, and it's not all about putting together really great stories and sharing great stories with people.
Okay, so when you speak to getting your comics in the hands of the people, is that a certain demographic you have in mind, or you just like, I just want everybody and anybody to get a hold of my comics?
Well, when I first started in this business, I really wanted to create positive stories for Black boys and Black girls. But over the years, have built up an audience all over the world. I mean, I can't control who buys my books, and people are going to buy what they like. I mean, right now, I have people all over the world who do pick up books that I've written over the years. I mean, all over the world, people, I mean, for my last Kickstarter for the John Haynes at Death's Door, I had a guy from Canada pick up John Haynes at Death's Door comic. I had a guy from the Netherlands pick up the John Haynes at Death's Door comic. And for many of my books over the years, I mean, I've had people all over the world picking up books in the ISIS and Esteem series. So I really don't care who picks up the books. I mean, I want to get the largest audience as possible. And I really want people to see Black people in a positive light. And that's the ultimate mission, is getting people to see really great stories with characters that are Black in them. Because if you see characters that are Black that are doing cool stuff, you'll want to pick up those stories because the characters are cool. And that's the thing that gets people excited about the characters, is really seeing those great stories. So it doesn't matter to me who picks up an SJS Direct book. I really would like to see build a large Black audience, but I don't care who picks them up. I just want to get great stories in the hands of readers.
Okay, we agree. As far as the Comicsgate, now I'm late, and I had to do a lot of the last 3-4 months, a lot of research and catching up. And I tell everybody my vantage point from the way it looks to me. It looks like a bunch of people infighting that is none of our business. Am I wrong in saying that? Because it seems like certain parts of us, factions of us, were kind of inserting ourselves into their business. I'm like, no, you got a bunch of white folk infighting about comics. That's how I looked at it. That's how it came across to me initially. Still, to a certain extent, it's kind of died down a bit. But my initial take was, that's white folk business. Let them handle it. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, you're absolutely right in saying that, because I was there about 2016. I was trying to, I thought that these guys were all about just getting comics in the hands of people. But really, it's just a bunch of white guys on the far right looking to fight with other white guys on the far right. They're not really interested in looking to do anything for Black people. And most of us Black creators, we just need to just stay out of this. And that's because Comicsgate is a certified clown show. And it's basically one group of white supremacists fighting another group of white supremacists. And they want to be able to control comics, because what they want to do is control the narrative over comics, because they believe controlling the narrative over comics will allow them to have influence over the industry. Unfortunately, what they don't see is that nobody in the trade industry takes these guys seriously. Yeah, they may go out here and get these high numbers on these Kickstarters and these Indiegogos, but the whole thing is those numbers are nothing compared to what comics used to do. I mean, I grew up in a time when 250,000 selling comic was the standard for a lot of books, and a book that sold maybe 1,000 units, that was considered like laughable at the time. It would get to the attention of a distributor here and there, and they would give you some advertising. But when it came to comics, those numbers that these guys are bragging about, I mean, those were like low indie numbers. And I knew of guys who do bigger numbers in the 90s as related to indies. But these Comicsgate guys, again, this is all one big pipe dream. And it's one where they're just fighting each other. And we need to stay out of it and just focus on building our brand and building our core audience.
Okay. I've been saying this. We should have had our own little sector of the industry and just been cool with that. I think the problem with well, let's get right into it. Let's go ahead and get into Eric July. The problem with it is it's like Eric's success has kind of blinded what the real issue is, and it's this false sense of camaraderie and this brotherhood in the comics. I'm like, no, we're cool up until a certain extent. So I've asked other brothers, is there always going to be some sort of racial undertone? Meaning we're good with the comics up until a certain point. Like we're all in agreement until okay, now y'all want what? You guys want main stage? You want center stage? No, no, no. That's how I'm picking up on this. I mean, like I said, everything's cool up until a certain point. Yes, DC and Marvel must fall, and yes, there must be a rise of independence and other sources of creation. It's cool, but y'all want all y'all to y'all. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, with Eric July, he's basically a paid shill. I mean, he's a bootlick, so he's an outlier as related to the whole medium of comics. I mean, he's basically their paid token who's just there to passively promote representation, but aggressively he's there to just promote their agendas. And that really runs counter to black comic creators like myself, because black comic creators, what we want to do is have a place where we can be able to tell our stories about the Black experience the way the late great Dwayne McDuffie and the creators of Milestone were able to do. I mean, guys like Eric July really aren't about that at all. No, with his ISOM, he basically wants to put Black people in the background to be tokens and aggressively push the white people to the forefront. And that's not what I'm about at all. No, I want to put Black characters front and center, like John Haynes and Esteem and Isis. I want them to be the center focus of the story. And I want people to see that the Black community isn't what they've seen in mainstream media. And that's always been a problem with the modern comic book industry. They really don't really want to put stories up there that show you the actual Black experience. And they don't want to hire the Black creators like myself to tell the stories that show you a balanced picture of the Black community. Now, some of these companies say, oh, that guy can't write Superman, that guy can't write Batman, and or any other character. But the original whole concept of the ISIS series actually came from a blog that I wrote proposing my whole run for Wonder Woman. I wanted to go out here and do an all-American princess with Princess Diana, but since I couldn't do it with Diana because I don't own the rights to Wonder Woman, I decided to say, hey, I have this ISIS character. I'm going to do it and do the goddess next door and do that concept that way. And the whole thing is with the American comic book industry, they don't want you to see Black characters at the center because they want you to focus on the white characters. And they want you to focus on the white characters because they don't want you to see Black people on the same level. We saw this with Static Shock around 2000, 2004. I mean, Static Shock was the #1 cartoon for Kids WB, and they didn't even give that comic a toy, not comic, that TV series a toy line. I mean, I had wrote an email to Dwayne McDuffie asking where the figures were way back when the series was on, and no plan to even make a series of figures. I mean, Jackie Chan got a series of figures, and Dwayne McDuffie kind of blew it off saying, oh, Jackie Chan is bigger than Static. I'm like, no, if your show is #1, you need to have a toy line. Because me and my brother, we used to go to the toy fair and check out the figures back in the 90s. And I know from then with licensing that if your show is getting big numbers, yeah, you're supposed to have a toy line. These toy companies are supposed to be talking to you.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is that Dwayne McDuffie, he didn't understand this. He was thinking, oh, I could just go along to get along, not understanding that the people at Warner Brothers were basically screwing him over because that merchandising was huge money. I mean, that was something I knew back in 2000, 2001. I was like, why don't you have a toy line? I mean, your show is on TV. I mean, Jackie Chan got merchandising. You don't have merchandising, and you don't have shirts. You don't have anything. I mean, if you look at Static Shock, they never had any merchandising, and it hurt the show. I mean, it kept it from having that 5th season. I mean, this is what they have said. Phil Lamar said this. He said, "Hey, we could have had it, but we didn't have the merchandising.
That's right.
We
I
didn't have the
remember. Yes.
licensing."
Right. Right.
And
Right.
and you didn't hear. And the whole thing is, I knew from 2000. I was like, "Where's the figures?" And the whole thing is, they do that deliberately because they don't want white children to start looking at Black characters as front and center. They want you to look at Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and they don't want you looking at a black character as front and center, because Static was front and center, and kids were looking at him and saying, "Oh, this black character is cool. This black character inspires me." I mean, that's the thing they don't want you to see, and that's why I say we got to have our own stuff, because when we have our own stuff, our characters can be front and center. I mean, I saw the impact of that back in 2018 when I did John Haynes' A Conversation with Death. I mean, that book had a huge impact on people. It was like, oh, this black character, he's so cool. He's into the supernatural. He's his own guy. He's the CEO of a corporation. I mean, they don't want our characters to have that kind of influence. So with these companies, what they do is they try to bury the black character in the background. They've been doing that, I'd say, about a good 50 years now. But what they hate is to see a character who's black be front and center. That was one of the reasons why Netflix's Luke Cage got canceled, because here was a black character who was in the lead. He was the center. He was masculine. He was strong. They didn't like seeing that kind of stuff. And that's always been a problem with these comic companies. They don't really like to push the black characters, but that's why we have to have independent companies like I have with SJS Direct, where we push the characters front and center, because that's the only way you can really get a black character to be seen. Because the mainstream companies, what they'll do is just bury a character like they have done for many years. And with publishers like myself, you'll see that black character, and you'll see them being able to actualize their potential and see them as strong and powerful as they are.
Okay, I like where this is going. I remember the Black Lightning series on CW, and for like the first 2 to 3 seasons, it was nearly perfect. But then the daughter was gay, and there was some other shit that, like, all of a sudden, the family started having all these issues, and I'm like, why are they inserting all these I don't know, issues with the family member, and it just couldn't be shown as just, they had to have something wrong with them. Something had to be wrong with each and every family member. And then the dad kind of fell off the rails a bit. And I was just like, and it's hard for me to want to support black content if it's not coming from us, because they're going to flip it, they're going to twist it, they're always going to insert something that's like that doesn't need to be inserted. Do comics really, and I'm saying comics, the industry, I know the answer that you're going to say, but I'm just asking the question, do they really want functioning, healthy images of black characters, with minimal character flaws? Or if they do have character flaws, they're relatable to everybody per se?
I really don't think that they do want that. I mean, there are great creators who did want it. I mean, I look at guys like David Michelini with the creation of Jim Rhodes and John Byrne to a point. I look at Mark Wolfman and George Perez with Cyborg. They show that they really wanted to just create great characters. But when I look at the industry as a whole, they oftentimes don't really want to put black characters front and center like that. I mean, when I look at what happened with Black Lightning, I mean, it was really sad, because Greg Berlanti basically shows me how much of a racist he is with the way he basically treated Black Lightning's characters. I mean, he basically was passive in looking to put these characters in a series. He put a black character as a lead in the series, but aggressively he looked to undermine that series, because he didn't want those books to be books, the TV series, to be bigger than his Arrow series. So he brought all this dysfunction in. He brought in the alphabet daughter. He brought in all of the dysfunction, because he didn't want people to see these characters as being on the same level as the Arrowverse characters that were white. And he really didn't really want to see that. And a lot of these guys in the industry, they don't want to put the black characters at the forefront, because they fear they're going to be able to lose their audience. Their white audience, because there's a lot of racists in the industry. And two, they just don't want you to see a black person having that kind of power. And that's a core problem with the comic book industry. They don't want you to see a black character having power on the level of the white characters. They don't want you to see a character taking power on the level of the white characters. That's what they don't want you to see, because they fear that this may inspire people as related to seeing a black person taking power. This is something I ran into when I had Mike Williams do the cover for John Haynes' Godbreaker. I mean, I did the cover with John Haynes holding Thor's hammer, and I got so much blowback that cover. I mean, people just upset with me because I showed John Haynes holding Thor's hammer and taking power. This is something that a lot of folks in the industry have an issue with. The whole idea of a black person being on a level where they can take power on the level of a white person. Because for some of these folks, this is their way to escape. This is their way to have power. And they get scared of a black person having that kind of power because in their world, they want to be the ones that are powerful. They want to be the ones that are supreme. I mean, that's what they really want. And when they see this black person having that kind of power, that's what upsets them. And that's why they don't really like seeing these black people in the industry or black people in the industry having power to control images, like what YouTuber Mr. Superboy talks about on his videos. He always says that image is very powerful because image can inspire you, image
Yeah.
can open up your imagination. And when
Right.
you see images of black people with power, it can really inspire you to start taking your own power. That's the issue that they have with these kind of images. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm always out here with books like the ISIS series and the Esteem series, because I understand that this can shape a child's life. I understand that if you see images of black people in a positive light, you see images of black people taking power and having ability of control over themselves, this can inspire you to open up your imagination and see yourself in a way where you have that kind of power and go out here and aspire to go out here and have that kind of power in the real world.
I remember, I forget which Mortal Kombat it was, and the whole controversy behind Jax's ending. And Jax had the one wish where he eliminated the transatlantic slave trade, and it showed all the black people and the cities of gold, and everyone's all dressed down to the nines, and so much heat came from that ending. And I remember them making the videos, and I remember seeing the comments, like it was offensive. Like, how dare you insert Jax wanting to end slavery, as his one wish? And I was floored, and that told me then, like, it would be cool up until a certain point, up until we say, hey, we want front and center. I don't understand why Europeans, Caucasians, whatever term you want to use, I don't get into why they don't see it that way. Because if you spent your entire life, generation after generation, always seeing yourself front and center, the big dog, the alpha, it would seem foreign to you to not see yourself in any other light. I don't get into well, this is why I don't waste my time with that. Is Eric July beholden to snatch up a bunch of black content creators and just create his own little death row and just be that and be done with it at the end of the day? Because I think the pandering to the mainstream is always going to be the downfall. You get the money, yes, you saw a void, you filled it, got the bag, manipulated, all the finesse, whatever, great. But these same people you're slowly pissing off, they're starting to turn on you. And then what's going to happen, as always, when the white folk kick you to the curb, you come back home to us and be like, hey, brothers and sisters, I need your help. Am I wrong? Or correct me where I went wrong in that.
Well, what the whole thing is that these guys like Eric July, they are beholden to white supremacy, and they don't want to imagine a world with a black person taking power. Now, when it comes to the whole Mortal Kombat thing, what made those people upset was somebody had the audacity to show what a black man would do if he had that kind of power. I mean, if you're a black person and you had power to shape time and space, you would want to go out here and empower your people by ending the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, if I wrote a story like that, that's the first thing I would put in that story. Say, hey, he's going to end slavery because the slavery was oppressive to black people. It laid the foundation for the whole foundation of white supremacy in reinforcing it. And the whole thing is it did psychological damage to generations of people. I mean, if you have an imagination, you saw an open imagination like I have, it's like, yeah, I want to see black people in power. So when I saw Jax ending slavery, I was very happy to see that because that was a concept I had for many years. I was like, yeah, you would want to see a black person in slavery if they had that kind of power. But with these white supremacists who are a major part of the comic book community and the fandom, they got upset because if you ended slavery, they wouldn't have the power. And a lot of these guys, they go to these kind of games like Mortal Kombat to escape because it's a place where they had power. So a lot of them got upset because this was the first time they actually dealt with black people who were presenting images of taking power. And the whole thing is this is something that upsets them. And it upsets them to the point because they're having to deal with the real world coming into the fantasy world. And they can't escape to a world where the white people have all the power. Now, the other part of this with Eric July is that, yes, he's out here with his Rippaverse line of comics, but the whole thing is, I wouldn't even want anything to do with him because his whole thing is about him being with these white folks and being a bootlick. And again, anybody who would associate with him would possibly have the same type of political beliefs. And as they would have the same type of political beliefs, that would not be something that would be focused on empowering black people. So they would have the same viewpoints as Eric July, believing that, oh, we're just Americans, we're not black Americans. And any book that would come out would be the same type of book where they were looking to be ones where the black people are in the background, looking to get all sorts of influence from white people. Because if we look at Eric July's universe, it's all about him having white acceptance and white approval. I mean, it's not about empowering black people because I read ISOM #1 and 2. I read what is it? I think it was called Alpha Core #1. And in all of those books, you have Braxwell, you have Isom, and these guys, they're just in the background of those books. So Eric July, basically, he's just a guy out here. He's looking to bootlick. He's looking to gain favor with this so-called white fandom. But the whole thing is the white fandom is basically just the far right. And they're not buying the books because they love stories or have passion for the stories. It's all about politics for them. So when it comes to a guy like Eric July, I really wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. I mean, I know that he is going to wind up, he's already turning, having guys like in the far right, like Ethan Van Sciver, getting upset at him. And they're getting upset with him because he's a black man who they think has power. And what they want to do is take away his power. And what happens with these bootlicks is like a guy on YouTube, Professor Black Truth, always says, bootlick is a job without a retirement plan. Because when it comes to these guys who are white supremacists in fandom, they want to be the ones with all the power. They want to be the ones that control the narrative. And they don't like the idea of him surpassing them. So when I look at Eric July, I mean, he's a guy, he doesn't know how bad the situation is for him. He doesn't understand it because he's still playing Candyland and not playing chess. He's talking about we will win, but not understanding they don't want you to win. They don't want a black man to win. No, they want to be the ones who win. And he doesn't understand that he's being set up to lose. And he doesn't understand that the way they're setting him up to lose is a part of the chess game. And again, he's too busy holding up pink cards and trying to go up Sugarland Falls to understand they're setting him up for a big fall.
Okay. Now let me play devil's advocate. If I remember correctly, I think last week he finally hired a black writer. So to his credit, maybe too little, too late. Had he not brought the politics into the fray, would your opinion of Eric July be different?
Well, it would possibly be the same because I've learned for years. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of these comic creators, and over time, and some of them, they have the same notion of being a bootlick, thinking that they can integrate, thinking that they can gain white acceptance. I mean, I always try to be very careful and as related to looking at these black comic creators because I mean, I've had experiences with some of them that just I thought they were all right in the beginning, then all of a sudden they just go right, and they go so right that I go look at them and go, how could you publish something like that? I remember there was a publisher I was working with called Concrete Comics, and I really liked a lot of their books until they did one called Primate, where they had the black man wearing an ape mask, and that's where I had to cut ties with them.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah,
Oh.
it was a black man with an ape mask on, and I said, and it was like we had a big beef, and it was sad because they had some pretty good comics that were putting positive images of black people out there. But this Primate book was where I just had to draw the line because it's like you have a black man with an ape mask, and this creator, he basically was a bootlick, and he was like, oh, I want to do this book that's sort of like Wolfenstein 3D with a ape mask, and didn't understand that the ape mask in and of itself, this is an insult to black people. I mean, why would you put a mask on of an ape knowing that this is the connotation that it has to black people, and that racists went out here and white supremacists, they oftentimes call black people apes and monkeys. I tried to sit down and explain it to their publishers, and they just blew me off, and they wanted me to sit there and have a debate with them. I was like, there's nothing to debate. This is a racist image. It's an insult to black people. And as a black-owned publisher, you have to have a responsibility to your customers not to put this type of content out. And that's why you have to be careful. I mean, over the years, as I've studied publishing, I understand that I have to be very careful about the images I put out here, because a lot of these racists will take advantage of it and use it towards pushing their agenda. They'll say, "Oh, those black people say that they're apes. Look at this comment. Look at the list. They're saying that they're apes themselves." I mean, this is the kind of stuff we have to be careful about. This is the kind of stuff we have to look out for as related to our image, because the whole thing is, if we are a part of New Black Media, we have to understand we have to control our image. We have to control the narratives of our image. We have to be able to protect our image, because with the white supremacists, they've had over a 200-year start as related to making mockery of our image. They've had a 200 and some odd year start as related to degrading our image. And we have to focus on taking power over our image. And part of taking power of our own image is controlling our image and controlling what comes out as related to our image, because you don't see white folks going out here and making images that degrade themselves. You don't see Asians making images that degrade themselves. You don't see Hispanics making images that degrade themselves. You don't see these people making images of themselves that are degrading, but you have black people who will go out here and look to validate this. And we have to be very careful about who we get involved with. We have to be careful about whose publications we go out here and promote. We have to be careful about what type of media we're presenting. We have to be very careful because, again, this is influential not only on us, but it's also influential to our children. And we have to be careful about what we put out here for everyone, because if we want to uplift our image, we have to be able to put out images that empower us.
Okay, wow. Sean, I think you've opened a can of worms on this one. Respectfully, I'm here for it. I don't give a fuck. Like, bring them on. I don't give a damn. And to prove your point, and to everybody in the chat, everybody's allowed to rock. Please keep it friendly, keep it respectful. But when I see comments like this, right? I don't know who Madness and Victory is, but sir, no black person holds Obama in high regard. That's the schism of, I think that is like, that just shows the schism. Almost like, it's like, you don't know how strong you are when you play with your child, right? You almost forget that you're 3-4 times the size of a little kid when you play wrestling. You forget how strong you are. I don't think non-urban folk really understand I don't want to say the plight of black folk, but nobody in their right mind openly is holding Obama in a high regard. Don't even count that dude. Like, it doesn't even count. Like, I think it just goes to show how far apart we are as a people per se, right? So let me ask you, I bought Ice One. I haven't read it yet because I've been trying to kind of get everybody's opinions out of my head so I can be fair and objective, right? I did my part. Now I see the moves he's making. I don't like it. I will no longer support Eric July. Just because off the strength of the people he surrounded himself with, right? How much support should we give him moving forward?
I think we should just walk away from him. I mean, as a guy who is black first, I have no dealings with this bootlick, and I would not support him. I mean, when I heard about him standing next to Kyle Rittenhouse, that basically did it for me. I was going to give him a chance and give his comics a chance. But once I saw that picture of him standing next to Kyle Rittenhouse, a man who came out here, I'm really not a man because he's a little punk bitch boy. And he came out here looking to murder black people, because the only reason why he came to Kenosha was to murder black people, because he felt that the black people in Kenosha were rioting and he wanted to have his smooth world. And because he wanted to have his smooth world and he wanted to put the black folks in his place, he decided to drive all the way from Kenosha, Wisconsin to Illinois. Not from Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm getting them mixed up, but he came there looking to kill black people, and he wanted to make this whole idea, oh, I was looking to protect property. It's like, no, when you're 17 years old, you're a minor, you have no business getting involved in that riot that's in another state. And if this boy had a real father in his life, his father would have told him this. And the whole thing is that you have Eric July standing at the side of this guy talking about it's a Second Amendment gun thing. No, it ain't got nothing to do with Second Amendment. No, with Kyle Rittenhouse, he was just a little punk white supremacist who wanted to, as I believe, look to go murder black people. And he wanted to go murder black people. And he wanted to believe that he could go out here and have the justification of law to do this. But the whole thing is that you have Eric July. He's sitting there going along with this. When I know, as somebody who knows the Constitution, knows the laws, and knows how things work, know that a 17-year-old boy coming to a place and he's not even supposed to be there. I mean, over 40 years ago, they did a Dragnet episode about vigilantes like Kyle Rittenhouse, and they said that they don't condone it. And in the episode of Dragnet, they were saying that this kind of guy is a vigilante and is somebody who's operating outside of the law. So when you have guys like Eric July, he's sitting there talking about, oh, I'm going to stand at the side of a guy who wants to kill you. I mean, that right there tells me that all I need to know about him. And that's why I never put in a pledge for ISIM. I just could not stand there and think it would be ethically right to stand at the side of a dude who's looking to go out here and stand at the side of people who want to kill you. I mean, the whole thing is this guy, when he saw my video on Twitter, he wanted to dismiss me. But that's when I said, we black folks, we got to get on code. And the way we get on code is by not putting our money in the hands of this guy. If he's going to go out here and support white supremacy, we've got to keep our black dollars in our pocket and take our black dollars and use them to support other independent creators who are looking to elevate us, empower us, and look to culturally enrich us by promoting positive images of us. That's how we deal with a guy like Eric July, because there are lots of great black creators out there who are creating a lot of great books like myself and many others. And the way we go out here and push back against an Eric July is by supporting those black creators over those who are black on the outside, but promoting anti-black racism to the world.
Okay. I don't want to go down the Kyle Rittenhouse rabbit hole too deep.
No, we don't want to go there.
No. Gosh, no. I know my place. But to be fair to the Rittenhouse situation, his people, them people got at him, and it wasn't us. But and that's how I discovered Eric July, was the photo with Rittenhouse. And once again, to myself, I said, you know what? That wasn't our place. That's not our business. That's them. Them were having some infighting issues, regardless of what his initial reasons were to be there. But his people got at him, and he did, whatever the case may be. I thought that was not a good look for Eric to post that picture, or whatever explanation he gave was pretty piss poor. Okay, so you say we shouldn't no longer support Eric July. Okay.
I never support. I was going to give him a chance, but I cannot support anybody who promotes anything that's anti-black.
Okay. How do you see it ending for Eric July at the end of the day? I have an idea, but I want to see what do you think? Crystal ball. You look into the crystal ball. How do you see this turning out? Oh, and do you see black folk ever mounting a mass amount of support for him, or is he just going to have to be stuck pandering to those that don't look like him?
Oh, I've seen this ending very bad for Eric July, because I've seen what happens to bootlicks. It's like Professor Black Truth has said in many of his YouTube videos. Bootlick is a job that does not have a retirement plan. And it doesn't have a retirement plan because when it comes to these white supremacists, they always have a plan to get rid of you. And that's something that Eric July didn't figure out, because he's still buying into the whole concept of just being an American, not understanding they always saw you as black. And what's going to happen to Eric July is what they're going to look to do is turn on him. Either they're going to try to take his company away from him, or they're going to look to try to discredit him in some way, because that's always what they try to do. They're going to try to find some way to be able to get that money in their pocket, because when it comes to these whites and non-blacks, it's always about being able to control two things. One is the wealth, and the other is being able to control the narrative. And what's happening with Eric July is he cannot really see the big picture of what's going on. But eventually, they're going to wind up giving him his ninja moment where they wind up just taking everything away from him. And that's basically what's going to happen to him in the long term. I mean, usually when these guys go out here and they bootlick like he does, they eventually do wind up turning on you. And this is something that's happening right now with these guys like Ethan Van Sciver and many of these Comicsgate guys. Eventually, they're going to start dropping their support, because the only reason why they're supporting him in the first place is because they believe he's got this far right platform. He's not really about black empowerment. So he's already going to start losing that audience, because they don't like the idea of seeing a black man having more power than they do and having control over white images. So eventually they're going to wind up turning on him and turning away from him once they can go out here and create what I believe is their guy who they can go out here and create a independent comic for them that can start getting the sales like he does. They're going to look to build an infrastructure, because what they're doing right now is studying his business model and trying to find a way to replicate it so that a white person can be in charge of it so they don't have to do it with him. And once they turn on him, that's when he's going to start looking to say, oh, I want to be with black people. But what I'm seeing with black people now is that a lot of black people were turning and leaving these bootlicks right we find them, like with Candace Owens, with Stacey Dash. And Eric July might become the next guy who winds up going out like Candace Owens and Stacey Dash.
Oh boy, you said a mouthful. Okay, let's do this. You bought Isom's 1 through 3 and Alpha Core.
I didn't buy them. I just read them online.
Oh, okay, right. Okay. As a creative yourself, storyteller, what issue did you have with the storytelling aspect of the character development? What issues did you have from one storyteller to another?
Well, as a writer, I just found Isom and all the Rippaverse books to just be poorly written. I mean, there's no real character development as related to the Avery character. I mean, the Avery character is he's just in the background of his own story. And the story in and itself is not very strong, because we don't get a sense of what he wants to do, because the story is very passive. And there's no real reason to care, because there's no real antagonist. I mean, we have a idea in Isom #1. Oh, there's a mystery of a girl who's disappeared, and they asked former superhero Avery to come out and investigate. And we really don't get a sense of awe and wonder and excitement about the Rippaverse. It just feels like some sort of neighborhood, and it doesn't really have any sort of personality. There's nothing really pops off the page, because in a comic, you really want to get people's attention in the first 3 to 5 pages of that story. But he takes about a good 10 to 11 pages and nothing really happens. I mean, this is not a sign of good writing for me when nothing happens in 3 to 5 pages to establish answering 3 critical questions. Who is the main character? What do they want?
Right.
Why should we care?
Right.
These are important questions that a writer has to answer very quickly. And even when I'm doing a comic like a John Haynes at Death's Door, I do that in 3 to 5 pages, letting you know, okay, this is the characters, this is what they want, and why should we care? And I understand page management in that you have to show a lot very quickly to get the reader's attention. And with Isom, I didn't get that from that at all. I mean, it was just a bunch of random sequences that don't really build into anything strong. And as the story goes on, nothing really pays off. I mean, the way you write a story is supposed to pay off with the hero winning. But with Eric July books, stuff just happens, and he just goes on. I mean, with the first Isom, we don't ever get the mystery solved of the girl missing, because the villain really isn't that much of an antagonist. This Darren guy, I mean, he's a local street guy, but I don't see how that ties organically into the superheroes. And then with Isom #2, the reason for Isom quitting is because he couldn't save a white girl. I mean, it comes across as
Oh,
really weak and underdeveloped. And
God.
it just, the ending of Isom #2 just made me shake my head. He's fighting these demons and then he just runs away. I mean, I felt like I was watching an Ed Wood as a comic book or Tyler Perry as a comic book. And the sequencing and transitions don't really work very well. We don't really get a sense of being able to follow the story because he just doesn't know anything about elements of storytelling, like sequencing, like making every panel move into every other panel. He doesn't know anything about pacing a story, where elements build into the first plot point, to the second plot point, to the climax and the conclusion. I mean, these are basic things that writers are supposed to know. And a lot of the writing came across to me as very emotional writing. And with emotional writing, it's all feelings, but it's not really much as related to good storytelling. So there were a lot of problems with Isom from a storyteller's perspective. I mean, nothing really sets up to pay off to anything because the whole point of storytelling is setting up to pay a story off.
Mhm.
And Isom's, they keep telling you, oh, if he's trying to build a universe, but I don't see anything building a strong foundation for a universe like I did with the SJS Direct universe, where you can see, okay, the Isis character, she started out in the 1880s, and then she went on to look to help Black people. And then with the John Haynes character, we see that yes, he's became a CEO, and now he's looking to help Black people. And we see that all of these characters are all part of an integrated universe. They all come together. We see everything forming together organically. I mean, we don't really see anything coming together with Eric July's Rippaverse. I mean, everything just feels kind of clunky and uneven. And the reasons for like with the Alpha Core, I just had to shake my head. You have a technologically advanced ship and a guy, they all go to try to get this fight for this USB key, and the guy puts the key in the computer of the ship to make it go haywire. I mean, as a guy who is an A+ certified IT technician, I can tell you that you never would put a USB key that you don't even know where it came from into your main computer at first. No, you would always have like a beater computer. You would put that key on, and that computer wouldn't be connected to the network, and you would use that beater computer to find out what type of files are on there. You would never put that on your main computer and leave yourself open to a virus. So I look at the story points, and it shows me Eric July really, he doesn't understand much about the craft of storytelling. He's just running on feelings about, oh, comics are far right, comics are not far right, far left, and these comics are so-called woke. This is what he's trying to go, but the thing is, he doesn't understand anything about the craft of storytelling. And in those books, he really shows me he really doesn't know what he's doing. And the people he hired, like Chuck Dixon, they show that they've lost a step. So the writing over at the Rippaverse is really going to be the thing that undoes it because there's no real foundation for story. There's no mission for the characters. I mean, with Isom, why is he here? That's the question I got to ask. Okay, what is your mission? I mean, with Peter Parker, there was a mission. Okay, he lost his uncle, and now he understands he needs to be responsible with those powers and use those powers to help people. With Tony Stark, he was attacked as related to the Vietnam War, and he's got this technology, and he wants to use it to protect it from people like those communists who went out here and tortured and terrorized it. With Steve Rogers, he was a mission of looking to serve people as a soldier and look to protect people. And with characters like John Haynes, he has a mission in that he wants to do good because all the evil that was done to him. With the Esteem character, she has a mission in that she has been out here. She was a demon, and now she wants to go out here and do right. With Isis, she wants to be the goddess next door who helps people out. And there's no mission with these new Rippaverse characters. I mean, there's no mission that makes you care. And that's the thing that's going to undo the Rippaverse is that it doesn't have those structures of old school comics that made us resonate with them. It doesn't have those things that connect you with the characters and see them as people like us. I mean, it just comes across as one big emotional thing that's done to try to gain white people's favor. I mean, the irony is that while they talk about how comics are a virtue signal, the Rippaverse is just one big virtue signal to me. And it's all about virtue signaling to white folks that, hey, I can go out here and make comics and I want your favor and approval.
Okay. Couple more questions. I'm gonna let you get out of here. can he turn it around if he hires a competent writing staff?
I think he could possibly turn it around, but the whole thing is that the politics over there is going to keep him from really getting the sales that he needs. I mean, he started his foundation based on politics, and most qualified writers, we don't want to really write about politics too much. We just want to just tell a great
Tell it.
story.
Right.
And I don't know if I want to work with that kind of guy. I mean, I wouldn't want to work with Eric July with all the politics that were over there because, you know, I don't want to be having everything so polarized. And that's one of the things that would really prevent him from turning it around because the people who are mostly buying his books are not readers. They're mostly people who are right wing. And those right wing people are not the same people that used to go to the comic shop or used to pick up books. I mean, you really want to, when you're out here selling books, you really want to appeal to that main audience like I do. I try to just write stuff that's something everybody can read. I mean, my standard for SJS Direct books is just keep it PG-13, keep the stories just in the middle as related to everyone and make them relatable. I mean, when it comes to Eric July, I don't see him turning it around because he just focused too much on politics. He's made too many enemies, and he hasn't really built that really fan base that love for characters. Because when you're out here as a creator, you want to build that fan base that loves the characters because the people who love the characters they're the ones who are going to come out and buy the books when you announce them. I mean, with John Haynes and Isis and Esteem, what I find is people come out to pick up the books because they love the characters, they love the stories, and that's the kind of people who I want to appeal to. And again, Eric July hasn't built that kind of base, but that's the kind of base I want to build as a publisher, is reaching out to people who just love great stories and want to read great stories and have fun with the characters.
Okay. Well said. One last question before I let you go. But let me get to the super chat real quick. Shout out to Carrie for the 10 on the super chat. Thank you, hun. Okay, before I let you get out of here, the final question. What should the Black or urban comic book content creators, writers, publishers, all that, what should they be doing now? What's their next course of action? Because obviously Eric is not going to be, he doesn't want to do the death row thing. That was my opinion. Like, I think he should do the death row thing, get all the Black everybody's and just be the death row. So he's not going to do that. Guys like you, Generation Geek, what all should you guys do? Because I have to thank Eric for this, because it had he not be beefing with Ethan and and making a fool of himself, I wouldn't have got to know none of you guys, right? I didn't know there was so many of you guys in the business, just all sparsed out throughout the universe, right? And now that I kind of found you all, what should they do? Should the next move be getting together, congregating, and creating some kind of consortium, a little mini network, or just keep doing what would you say if you could run it, if you could have your wish?
Well, I'm always open to working with different creators all over, and I always work with other Black creators. I mean, even before I came to YouTube, I was always passionate about looking to work with other Black creators, getting their work out. And as I came to YouTube after writing my blogs for many years, I've always gone out here and looked to work with other creators. I mean, I've always put in pledges on other creators' work, like with Raymond Leonard with his Agent Solo books. I used to support the Concrete Comics universe. I mean, I always look to work with other Black creators and helping get the word out about their books, looking to help out other creators and helping them get their word out. That's the most I can do right now as related to things. And I even go out here and I get Black artists. Like I have Mike Williams, who does the Great Geek Sledge strip. He does the covers for the John Haynes series. I'm always looking to work with a lot of great Black talent. I mean, I've talked to Kevin Greville, who created Blue Marvel a while back. He even picked up a copy of John Haynes' at Death's Door, the comic. But I'm always open to working with different creators, networking with great creators, learning from different creators. I mean, Kevin Greville helped me out a lot with getting the John Haynes comic out. And I've always been looking to work with great Black creators and getting the word out with them. And the more we work together, the more we can build a network with each other and help get our stories out there, get our image out there, because it's all about us really taking control of our image, taking control of our stories, and taking control of our narratives as related to our stories and our experience. So when it comes to Black creators, we could never rely on Eric July. It should never be one individual, because when it comes to white supremacy, they always want to have give one person that kind of influence and power so that they can pick them off. But when there are multiple people out here as related to our image and our stories, they can't really pick anybody off, because, as I said in a video a while back, individuals get picked off. But when you are a group, you can go out here and tell different stories about the Black experience, tell stories that show that we come from different walks of life, like what I do on the SJS Direct imprint. I not only have the SJS Direct universe, with Isis, Sean Haynes, and Esteem. I have other characters like the Spinsterella character, who's a Black goth. I have the Lilith Graves character in the Eternal Night vampire novel. I mean, I show you a richer picture of the Black experience in all my stories, and as related to the SJS Direct universe. And the more voices that are out there, the more stories that are out there, the richer the picture of Black people becomes. And that's what I'm all about as related to things. I mean, as a guy who's been in the grassroots and the underground for, I say, ever since the 90s, and even when I started publishing, even before I started publishing in 2002, I've always understood that this is a long marathon, and you've got to have the patience and endurance to go through it. You have to continue to persevere. You have to continue to push, and you have to work with those who want to work with you. I mean, eventually what will happen is the bootlicks are going to reveal themselves, and you know who not to deal with. But there are folks out there who are out here who want to see richer pictures of Black people and the Black experience. I talk to them on Facebook all the time. And there are folks out there who want to see great stories and great storytelling. And you have to go out here, find them, work with them, and they will look to support you. I mean, it's a long, rough road. I mean, in the last 2 years, I've had a bit of a struggle with sales with books, but I continue to persevere. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to keep pushing and keep persevering, because there's a lot of great stories out there, and you just have to make the effort to get them out to the audience.
Wise words from the OG, Sean James. Sir, where can everybody find your works?
Well, you can find my first full comic, John Haynes, at Death's Door on Lulu.com in paperback, and you can get it for the same price on Lulu as the 2022 Kickstarter. And you can get all of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, like the Isis series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, and those books that I talk about, like the Black Goth books, like the Spinsterella trilogy books, Spellbound, The Legendary Mad Matilda, and Spinsterella. You can find all of those books in paperback on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. And you can find all of my books in digital format at online booksellers like Google Play and the iBookstore, Drafted Digital. And you can also get my other comic I did with Esteem No Good Deed I did with Bill Walker. You can find it on Kindle for 99 cents. So you can get all my books at all the online booksellers. You can just type in Sean James Isis series, or Sean James John Haynes, or Sean James Spinsterella. You'll find them all. They all pop up in Google. And all those books, again, are available in paperback and Kindle format. And you get them at all your favorite online booksellers.
The OG, Mr. Sean James, thank you for your time. I don't want this to be the only time you come through, because this discussion, I think we just scratched the surface. There's so many different layers that we need to peel back, and I definitely want to get your take on it. So I know it's late over there. I've had you on for an hour and a half. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having
please
me.
go. Yeah, hey, no, anytime. Please go out and support this man's works. He's been doing it for a long time. He's been doing it before it became cool. So shout out to Sean James. Support Sean James. And with that being said, sir, I'm gonna let you get out of here. Thank you for coming through. Enjoy the rest of your night, sir.
All right. You have a good evening.
Thank you. Y'all, nasty work today. Hey, shout out to everybody that came through. Even if you don't agree, I appreciate everybody being respectful. I want everybody's opinion to be heard. And it's a conversation I think needs to happen, should happen. I'm glad I had it with Sean James. Shout out to Sean James, Generation Geek, Mark with the C, Fatal J, all the brothers I've met. Red Sings the Blues, shout out to all you guys. I'm so glad I'm able to find you all, and I hope I find some more. Abomination J. So I'm reaching out to any and everybody in the business, in that space, and I definitely want to pick y'all's brains. So with that being said, I think me and Ray gonna try to come back in about 20 because Ray got some stuff he want to get off his chest. So I should see y'all in about 20 minutes. Y'all have a good night. Peace. No, give me about 20 minutes. Ray, we ready in about 20? Should be ready in about 20.